It's marijuana madness in Canada today. Our neighbors to the north officially legalizing pot this morning with massive crowds gathering at stores all over the country. CNBC's Dirdre Bosa is in Canada in the middle of the cannabis craze. Dirdre.
That's right, Melissa. That craze started right here in St. John's, Newfoundland, the easternmost part of the country, and moved west throughout the day. We saw everything from cheering lines, parties, a celebratory group wake and bake, and even a gigantic bud of cannabis, which we're going to show you, that dropped from the ceiling at midnight in Toronto. But guys, after all the celebrations, day one is almost over. Tomorrow and in the coming days, the initial high of legalization may wear off, and this country is going to be faced with some tough questions. One's involving supply constraints. We already saw some of those issues today, as well as cybersecurity when it relates to online sales. That, critics say, could turn people back towards the black market. Critics also say that police are unprepared to deal with cannabis-impaired drivers. There's also the potential effect on the medicinal weed market. Earlier today, we actually spoke to a few people in line who said that they were having problems already sourcing medical marijuana in the lead up to today's legalization. Now, the financial windfall as well, something to manage expectations perhaps, because the government may not get everything that it has promised. 6 months into California's legal weed era, the state reported far less than what was promised on their ballot measure. Now, certainly, guys, these are all issues that have been debated in Canada for weeks and years leading up to this momentous moment. But the difference is that now Canadians will have to grapple with them on a global stage with many others watching. And I know you guys are going to talk about this, but notably absent from the party today were some of the biggest cannabis stocks who perhaps took a healthy leg down, or perhaps investors are contemplating some of these longer-term challenges. Melissa?
All right, Dirdre, thank you. Dirdre Bosa in St. John's in Canada. Well, you would think pot stocks would be blazing, but as Dirdre had mentioned, instead, they're looking a little bit burnt out today. Tilray, Kronos, Canopy, Aurora, all sinking double. You got to.
We hate puns.
Sinking double digits in just the past 2 days. Before we get to the traders, we should note that Tim Seymour is all in on this space. He's long a number of names, sits on the advisory boards for 3 cannabis stocks. For all of his disclosures, you can go to fast.cnbc.com. Given that, was this a sell the news event, Tim?
I think it was for the big Canadian LPs. I think the news about supply shortages and bottlenecks and operational and even, online or hacks or I think that's noise. The reality is this is the first time this is happening. There's going to be some kinks to be worked out. When people are talking about these companies, they weren't talking about how smoothly this was going to go, and they're not talking about the numbers for the first quarter. They're talking about the addressable market. They're talking about a global footprint, and they're talking about companies that have a first mover advantage in a world where you have to believe this is changing consumption trends nationally. So that's what I think this is about.
We had the Dean evaluation on yesterday.
We did, from NYU, I believe.
Yes, although he was in San Diego. But he makes an interesting point, is that we don't really know. We can't really know what the total addressable market is. We don't know what the uptake is going to be in the consumer space. We don't know what the uptake is going to be on the recreational side. And then there's the dynamic that Dirdre had talked about, and that is the black market could still reign supreme because it's cheaper to buy in the black market in general, because the government doesn't tax that. The government taxes weed when you have it federally legal, like in Canada. So there's a question of the price discrepancy. And so maybe those sales won't go to the legal channel, and we won't see that market actually expand to what it should be.
Well, the two things I'd say about the black market is, first of all, a lot of the companies that are operating today at some point were operating in the black market and have legitimized businesses and have come forward. I'm not naming any of the particular companies. It's just the reality. I also think that if you can bring consistency, predictability, and actually regulation to an industry where there's a lot of uncertainty, people are going to go to that market, and prices are not going to be the issue. They're not going to be the issue.
Well, there's a couple other things going on. I don't really know much about these companies or the supply constraints, but if you go to California where it is legal, there's a lot of businesses that are kind of booming around this. And so there's a company called Eaze, E-A-Z-E, that does delivery. It's kind of like the Caviar or the Uber Eats of weed, And then,
is that an app on your phone?
Well, no. And then their website is built by Shopify. There's a lot of angles here for a new market. There's going to be tons of banking opportunities and logistics. So to me, I think that's probably how you kind of focus on this. I don't know how you.
So the picks and shovels as opposed to.
There you go, man.
All right. Well, CNBC has been hitting the pot story hard today with a number of CEOs appearing on the network, including Tilray CEO Brendan Kennedy. Kennedy, and he said a few things about the potential size of the industry that has our cannabis king here, Tim, up in arms. So we thought it'd be a perfect time to play Not So Fast. Now, we haven't played this in a little while, so let's recap how this works.
Can we please?
We're going to play a clip of the interview. Whenever Tim feels like it, he'll jump in and say, not so fast.
Whoa.
All right, the interview will pause,
Got
a
it.
stamp will appear that you see there, then Tim will elaborate on his point. So are you ready, Tim?
Yeah, I think I've never been more ready, actually.
All right, let's roll the tape.
Let's go. Roll the tape.
I think the total addressable market over the next 5 to 10 years globally is 150 to 200 billion. And I think you'll see a handful of companies dominate part of that industry. Let's say 80%. I think it looks more like beer than any other industry that I can think of. And so if 3 or 4 companies control 150 billion in terms of market share, you can get to 2 or 3 companies that have $100 billion market cap.
Hold on.
Just like
not so fast. Can we stop it? Thank you. Some really important points here. First of all, he's saying that 3 or 4 companies are going to dominate and they're going to be north of $100 billion. Now, Tilray, by the way, is a $15 billion company, and a lot of people think that valuation is difficult right here. I think the point is that what is the total addressable market cap? And when you hear Mr. Kennedy talk about this market, I'm just hearing really the recreational vertical. I don't think this is getting into OTC pain. I don't think this is getting into biopharma. I don't think this is getting into nutraceuticals. So I think it's extraordinary to think that only a couple of these guys are going to make it out of this. And I think he may be absolutely right. If you think about the operators now that are moving forward, and there's some in the U.S. that not a lot of people know about, that have run very efficiently, have built their businesses on not a lot of capital, and actually maybe the biggest guys that nobody knows about. So be careful and watch out for those names. So let's do it. Let's keep moving and move on to the next point.
I also think that we're in a really interesting position where every CEO, every chief strategy officer at every other alcohol company and every other functional food and beverage company and every other pharmaceutical company is looking at this industry.
So not so fast. Stop for a second. So first of all, to put this into context, if you think about it, Jim Cramer actually had part of this interview earlier where he asked CEO Kennedy, Brandon, hey, what do you think about the Amazon of, or at least, they've been referenced to be the Amazon of the cannabis world, the Constellation Canopy partnership, and how do you expect to compete with them? And ultimately, if you think about it, again, it gets back to who do you think really is going to be winning out? Is it the guys that actually have built an enormous cash pile? And I would make an argument that a pile of cash without making good decisions is the way a lot of capital is eradicated. I would not suggest that that's what's happening with Constellation, but I would say that you have to be careful. Just the cash-rich guys are not the only ones. But I say this again. If Diageo is coming into this market and Pfizer is coming into this market, they're doing 2 different things in this industry. That's what's exciting for a Tilray. Let's keep moving. Let's finish this off.
How they're going to respond to Constellation. And so that puts us in a very good place in terms of having those conversations.
Really quickly, by the way, some big news after the bell. That Mr. Sands is actually stepping down as the CEO, and actually Bill Newlands is going to be taking over. Interesting that actually Newlands was on the panel with Mr. Linton and Jim Cramer on Saturday, so I think some of this transition was already underway. I don't think this changes the story at all, but it's big news for people that have been following the sector because Constellation is the big gorilla.
Pete, picks and shovels or marijuana produce growers?
I own Constellation for exactly some of the reasons that Tim has brought up in terms of what they've done there. But also, they have a great business before they decided to jump in there. And I think that mix is going to be something going forward that's going to be great.